All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to CNET58. This is the start of week 12, which is almost impossible to really realize we've come so far so fast. And today we are going to take a look at security, and particularly we're going to focus on honeypots, and we'll get into some of that in a little bit. And then we'll have a lab today. I'm going to try to walk through the lab with you, so we'll kind of do it together to get to make sure everybody's able to accomplish everything they need to accomplish. And that's it for this week. Of course, you probably have seen that the summer registration is now open. So if you're interested in taking any of most of you have probably already taken the A+ prep class and the Network Plus prep class. But if you haven't and you have time, there are a couple online classes you can take there. All right. So any questions or comments about last week's lab or quiz 3 or where we're at as far as the schedule? Everybody good to go as far as, feeling comfortable with where we're going, where we're at? Okay, the finals week, week 16, there's no lecture. You'll just have access to the final exam, and you'll have access to the lab final, just like we kind of did the midterm week, where you had the whole week to do it. So that's how the finals week will look. All right, but thanks, that's a good question. All right, so let me share my screen here real quick. And first I want to log into Canvas. Hopefully you can see my screen here. So here is what we've got lined up for this morning. If we go down to week 12, so we have the lecture, we have the lab, which I'll open up the lab when we're ready for that. There is a file that you'll need to download to your Windows 10 One virtual machine from Canvas. It's this kfsensor.msi. And the reason I downloaded it for you and put it on Canvas is you have to register for it. You have to put in an email and all that stuff. It's a trial version of a honeypot, but I downloaded it so you don't have to get bombarded with a bunch of spam from the company that makes it. All right, so let me share the PowerPoint, and then we'll get going. All right, so I titled this lecture honeypots fighting back. And if you've read the newspaper or an online news feed, or watched the nightly news, or done just about anything other than living under a rock for the last 10 years, you've probably heard a lot of stories and anecdotes about the bad guys cracking into someone's system and either stealing their data or encrypting it and demanding a ransom. And there's just a lot of bad activity going on the internet right now, right? As I'm sure you've heard of that gas line that was just compromised like a couple days ago. And I've got bad news, good news and bad news. The good news is if you just filled up your tank last week with gas, which I happen to have done, so I have good news. If you haven't, the bad news is the price of gas is going up even more than it was before. So these little escapades by these hackers, and they're not sure where it started. Some of the evidence points that it was through some servers or some locations in Russia, but there's no evidence that it was Russians that did it. You know what I'm saying? So, but some of the evidence so far is pretty sketchy. So today we're going to look at what we can do as server administrators and to kind of either slow that down or probably a better word would be to divert that attention from our production systems to something else, right? So this is going to bring up the introduction of what is a honeypot. Now, have any of you ever worked with a honeypot? Have any of you ever come across this concept before? Okay, let me see here. Got a chat. Okay, so Frankie, you've seen a honeypot? And we're not talking about the ones like on Winnie the Pooh, you know, where Pooh Bear is always trying to get the honeypot. These are network security honeypots, but so let's walk through this scenario. And this is from an actual documented situation that occurred. Okay, so here we go. Our honeypot was closely monitored and we could observe every single step the adversary took on our system. The incident started on April 3rd when our Red Hat based honeypot was compromised due to weak SSH passwords. The adversary got access to both the user and the root account. She probably considered herself lucky to have gained access to a high-speed university network. So this is a honeypot that's set up on a campus, right, at a university. And one of the purposes of the honeypot is to learn the steps or the techniques that your adversary is going to take. Have any of you ever seen the Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr.? It's been a few years ago, but there's a scene in there where he's in that boxing ring with that big guy, right? And Sherlock Holmes is just a little guy. But they show Sherlock Holmes anticipating the other boxers' every move, right? So he knows when he's going to do, you know, a left to the body, so he moves to the right. He knows when he's going to, you know, do a jab to the face with his right hand, so he ducks the other direction. He knows when he's going to, you know, take half a step to the right and then do a big uppercut. So, you know, he ducks and moves, right? So imagine if you were in a boxing contest or a fight of some type, whether it's martial arts or whatever it is, if you knew exactly the steps and the methods that the person you were in competition with were going to take, you could easily mitigate and eliminate the threat, right? Because if you know how this bad guy is going to attack you, it gives you a huge advantage in defending yourself. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to win the match, right? I mean, there's no guarantee of that, but it does mean you're going to, have your best possible defense. All right. And there's a famous Chinese general who has he wrote this book, or he had a manual created based on his strategies called The Art of War. And that's basically the concept behind network defense using honeypots. Is if you know your enemy, you can defeat your enemy. Okay, so our situation here, this person was looking for some SSH capabilities, and they found access to a machine that responded to SSH, and they were able to attack a couple of accounts because they had weak passwords. So what she did not know was that we had intentionally installed a guessable password. Actually, this kind of attack is very common. If you run an SSH server, just look at the log files. Now, when I was an IT director, we had a Blackboard server, which Blackboard kind of gave way to Moodle, and Moodle gave way to Canvas. So it was in the learning management system. And every morning I would get an email from the Blackboard server that just gave me their log files, right? Which is a common network administrator, server administrator task, is to review the log files. And on this one particular Blackboard server, there must have been 500 attempts to log in on one night. So, and the only thing I used the SSH server for was for me to access the server remotely. So since I was the only one that was using it, it was not a function of Blackboard. It was just for the administration of Blackboard. So what I did is I just changed the default port from port 22 to a port I did 222, so 222, which is a non-standard TCP/IP port. So I just changed the server to run on that, and then I just changed my client to connect to a different port, and I still had access to Blackboard. But the next day, I looked at the log files, and there were 0. I mean, there was one where I logged into it to test it. Other than that, there were 0 attempts to attack that server. And what you'll find, and this is very, very common on the internet, is that there are machines that are just running either worms or some sort of automated attack system, where they'll just go out and they'll search the entire internet, IP after IP after IP, looking for port 22. And then once they find it, they will just use a brute force dictionary attack to continually try this user, this password, this user, this password, this user, this password, over and over and over and over. So by me moving it, I mean, I didn't turn off SSH. I just changed from the standard port, right? And we know what those ports are. They're the first 1,024 ports are known as the well-known ports. And they're well-known because that's what everybody runs their stuff on. But by moving it, it just, like, instead of the front door of the business being right on Main Street, where anybody could come by and jiggle the door handle and see if they can get in, I put the door on the backside of the building, not on Main Street, where nobody could see it driving down the street, right? So SSH is common to get hit. Just like if you have a web server running on port 80 or port 443, you can anticipate that if you have it, they'll come, right? Just like, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you have a forward public-facing server that's running a service, whether it's SSH or web HTTP, HTTPS, it will attract some attention, not just your actual audience who you're trying to get to access it, right? The people you intend, it'll have the others as well. So using our log files and other information gathered on the honeypot, it was easy to reconstruct the series of events that took place. Okay, so now we're going to kind of use their evidence, because that's really what a honeypot is. It's like a fishbowl that you can let the bad guys interact with, but it will leave a footprint of every step that they've taken. And once you know how they're going to, attempt their evil activities, you can counteract it, right? That'd be like if you had your car and you knew that if you don't park under the light in your parking area, somebody will come by and try to open the doors or look for, any opportunity to get inside your car. What are you going to do? You're probably not going to park it in the darkest sections of the parking lot, right? You're going to park it under the light, because under the light, they're not as likely to, get after it. So as in many movies, the attack took place in the middle of the night, and it originated from a university host in Norway. The adversary initiated an attack against the honeypot's SSH server shortly after midnight, right? Remember, I remember growing up, my mom would always tell us, why do you want to be up after midnight? Nothing good ever happens after midnight, right? Some of your parents probably said the same thing, right? And if you grew up like me, you had a curfew, and you had to be in at certain times. And I remember my mom and my dad, they would always say that. Why do you want to be up? Why is it such a problem to come in and be home by midnight? Nothing good happens after midnight. And here's proof of it. So it originated from a university host, and it started shortly after midnight. Her automatic tools cycled through many thousand different username and passwords before she got lucky and guessed the root password. With complete and unlimited access to our system, the adversary, arriving from an Italian IP address this time, downloaded several tools from different web servers to facilitate her malicious actions. Among these tools was an SSH scanner, an internet relay chat client, and a rootkit. Now, what do you think this person is using to come from Norway first and then from Italy? What are they probably connecting through? Anybody? Right, Louis said a VPN. And that's exactly right. A VPN allows you to connect through different endpoints on anybody's network, right? How many of you use a VPN? I do. I have a VPN client, which I use, called IPVanish. So I'm not going to connect to IPVanish now because I'll lose the connection to everything I'm on and have to reconnect. But it allows me to connect anywhere in the world to the internet. So don't report me to Fox TV, but there were a couple of years ago, there was a Dallas Cowboy game on, and it wasn't shown here in Southern California. The game that was here was like some lame team like the Rams or something. So I wanted to watch the Cowboy game. So I just said, okay, let me see if it's on in Dallas. So I connected to my VPN. I found a server in Dallas, Texas. I connected through it. Then I opened the internet, went to fox.com, and sure enough, the first thing that comes up is watch the game. So I clicked on it and I was able to watch the Cowboy game because it thought I was connecting to its server from Dallas, Texas. Now, if I did the same thing from LA, right, from Los Angeles County, it would have given me the Rams game, which I knew was on because it was on TV, right? So they do those local broadcasts. So VPNs are very, very common. And if you're not using a VPN not to hide all your activity, but to encrypt it, I mean, that's really the benefit, is it will scramble all the activity. So if whatever happens between you and the VPN gets captured somehow, someone sniffs it and gets a packet of it, they're not going to be able to do anything with it. Okay. So with her tools, she had an SSH scanner. So that's the tool that they use to find SSH targets, an IRC client, internet relay chat, so that she could send her information back and forth, either with her coworkers or whoever she's working with, or from one station to another. You can use it to transfer files. And then a rootkit, which you put on, so the machine, even if it gets rebooted, that stuff's still running underneath everything else. All right. So let me get here. In addition to the rootkit, a back door was installed to allow the attacker to come back at any time without anyone noticing. So instead of coming through the front door, they set up their own little back door, just like I did with port 222, right? I was the only one that knew that. They kind of did the same thing so that they could get in and out of this. And when she started downloading the movie Get Rich or Die Trying in Spanish, they decided that things had gone on long enough, and we shut down the honeypot. And this is from a book by Niels Provos and Thorsten Holtz called Virtual Honeypots. So if you're looking for a good read and you want to learn more about honeypots, that's a really good book. All right. Now, here's the timeline. So this is very interesting. So at 12:23 a.m., after several minutes of scanning, the adversary manages to log in for the first time, utilizing the guest account. Not satisfied, the adversary continued to guess passwords for further accounts. So they found one account, but they're going to keep looking to see if they can get the other accounts. Jackpot, successful login as the root administrator. However, despite getting root, the password guessing continues, which is a very strong indicator that the whole attack was being automated. Now, there are scripts, and if any of you are interested, you can download these from the internet, and you can just run them, and they will just automatically look for hosts to attack, and then automatically run through the password cracking over and over and over, and you don't even have to be at your computer. Now, if you perform one of these scripts, you're affectionately referred to as a script kiddie. So, and these are generally people that don't really have a ton of network and technical knowledge, but they can click start and run on these scripts, and the script will do all the work. Okay. So at 12:51 a.m., the user guest logs in, but logs off a few seconds later. We assume that the adversary manually verified the correctness of the automatically guessed usernames and passwords. So they were running this script, and then they came back at 50 minutes later after they started at midnight, let it go. And then they checked back in and it said, hey, we found these two passwords, and they verified them. Okay. Now the user root logs in, but this time from an IP of 83.103.something.something. While logged in, 3 new users were created. So now they're creating their own users to use, all of them with a group and user ID of 0, which means they're in the root administrator group. So whatever user they created could now do anything on the system without logging on as root. Because if you see a bunch of root logins on your machine and you're the root user, you're the administrator, or you and your team is, you're probably going to ask questions. Hey, Bob, did you log in from Italy last night for some reason? No. Jan, did you log in from Norway? No. I mean, it would kind of look suspicious. So the root user will no longer be used. At 54, the intruder logs in using the guest account and changes the password for this account. She then starts downloading a file with their tools of trade from a remote web server. So now they're going to go grab their tools. It's like, okay, I got in. Now let's start, building inside here what we want to do. So let me go grab my toolbox. That's what they do. The file completes downloading. It contains an SSH scanner, shell scripts to start it, and 2 dictionary files to generate usernames and passwords. 10 seconds later, files XYZ and 1 are downloaded as well. File XYZ is another dictionary file for the previously mentioned SSH scanner. File 1 is a simple shell script which facilitates the proper execution of the SSH scanner. Now, here we are a couple of minutes later, the SSH scan is initiated. The scan finishes after about 3 minutes, and the controls on the honeypot prevent any harm to other machines. And we're gonna talk about the legalities of honeypots today. So what if this machine had been compromised, which is what they wanted it to be, is compromised? But what if then that machine is used to damage other people's systems? Would the owner of the honeypot be liable, or would the user be liable? It would be similar to if somebody stole your car because you parked it in the darkest part of the parking lot, and then they used your car to commit a crime of some sort. Say they did a hit and run, or they ran through some red lights and came up on a red light scanner, traffic camera. Would you be responsible as the owner of the car for the activity that they've done? The answer legally is no, right? But with a honeypot, it's a little bit different, because 1, you did not park your car. They're hoping someone would break into it and steal it, right? You could probably easily say, I had no intent that anybody would even attempt to use my car for any of those crimes. But what about a honeypot? Well, we built that on purpose. We wanted people to, jiggle the door handle and find it unlocked, or find it easily unlocked. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. So, and the activity goes on for another few hours. All activity is recorded and analyzed. All tools involved were saved and were looked at to determine what they were used for. The rootkit was called Suckit, which provides a password-protected remote access shell capable of bypassing firewall rules. So, we always talk about, use strong passwords, set up a firewall, limit the time and location from which people can access your stuff. This tool avoids firewalls. It just goes right by them as if they're not there. So, so much for our best practices. Some of it doesn't really help anything. So suck it was the tool used. So what is a honeypot? So there's a couple links on my screen. I don't think you have those in the one on Canvas, but a honeypot is a closely monitored computing resource that we want to be probed, attacked, or compromised. More precisely, a honeypot is an information system resource whose value lies in unauthorized or illicit use of that resource. And that's from the company Security Focus. So let me open this link here. And let's watch this video real quick. So this video is just going to kind of walk us through a simple explanation of what is a honeypot. All right.
Welcome to the next episode of the Dark Web Beacon. Before we begin, be sure to smash that subscribe button, click the bell to turn on notifications. New videos are published every Monday and Thursday, and as always, be sure to like and provide comments. If you have ever wondered how the cybersecurity experts and IT firms go after the bad guys or try to analyze what they are going to do next, well, one way is something called a honeypot. You see, in addition to security measures you might expect, such as strengthening a computer network to keep out cyber criminals, the cyber experts use a honeypot to do the opposite, attract the bad guys. Honeypots are closely monitored decoys that are employed in a network to study the trail of hackers and to alert network administrators of possible intrusions. Honeypots provide a cost-effective solution to increase the security posture of any organization. Nowadays, they are also being extensively used by the research community to study issues in network security. Honeypots have several real-world applications. They serve as network decoys, as we mentioned earlier, to prevent attacks on an organization's real networks by appearing to be easy targets. By tracking all activity on a honeypot, such as viruses and worms, so they can be more easily detected. In addition, honeypots can be used to combat spam. The idea of honeypots began in 1991 with two publications, The Cuckoo's Egg and An Evening with Burford. The Cuckoo's Egg by Clifford Stoll was about his experience catching a computer hacker that was in his company's network searching for secrets. The other publication, An Evening with Burford by Bill Choate, is about a computer hacker's moves through the traps that he and his colleagues used to catch him. In both of these writings, it was the beginning of what became known as computer honeypots. The first type of honeypot was released in 1997, called the Deceptive Toolkit. The point of this kit is to use deception to attack back. In 1998, the first commercial honeypot came out. This was called a CyberCop Sting. Honeypots are shared and used all over the world, and this technology continues to improve, and many honeypot users feel this is just the beginning and they're only going to get better. Looking beyond computers, the idea of honeypots has been around for decades. The principle behind them is pretty simple. Don't go looking for attackers. Prepare something that would attract their interest, aka the honeypot, and then wait for the attacker to show up. For example, a cheese-baited mousetrap is a classic example. Or let's say a neighborhood that's been burglarized a lot. So someone sets up a camera outside their home and leaves a bike outside for them to steal, which would act as the honeypot. There are two common questions that often are brought up when discussing honeypots. One is a honeypot just a computer? And two, how do honeypots work? Well, honeypots often are just computers, but they can also be other things in the form of data records, idle IP address spaces, or files. They must be handled carefully, as there are chances of hazards being carried out on the network. Hacker can make use of a honeypot to break into a system. Hence, it should always be walled off appropriately from the rest of the network. In regards to how it works, let's assume you're the CTO of a large bank. So you may want to set up a honeypot system that to the outside user looks as if it's part of your banking network. Honeypots are generally based on a real server, a real operating system, and with data that appears to be real. You would then set up extensive monitoring of these systems, networks, and software so you can better understand where cyber criminals are coming from, how they operate, and what they want. More importantly, you can determine which security measures you have in place are working and which ones you need to improve. On the basis of implementation, honeypots can be categorized as either low involved or high involved honeypots. So what's the difference? A typical low involved honeypot will have a few ports open so that the administrator knows what ports the attackers are trying to connect to. The attacker will not be allowed to do anything else on the low involved honeypot. Hence, low involved honeypots are relatively low risk. Low involved do not give you much insight into what the attacker wants or what they may do once they're inside your network. Hence, they are normally used as production honeypots. A typical high involved honeypot, however, will have, for example, a few ports open and a few vulnerable services running. Hence, the attacker is allowed to actually break into the honeypot. The attacker is allowed to do anything he wants to that highly involved honeypot. So the high involved honeypots are considered relatively risky. High involved honeypots can be used to gather a lot of insight on the tools, techniques, and methods used by the attacker. Hence, they are normally used for research. A recent example of how highly involved research-oriented honeypots can be leveraged was performed by Symantec. They set up a honeypot to attract attackers to a so-called Internet of Things network. These are internet-connected items such as home routers, digital video cameras, home cameras, and smart appliances. Symantec's IoT honeypot worked great. Attacks on the honeypot almost doubled from January to December. There is a lot experts can learn from honeypots. In the case of Symantec's IoT honeypot, researchers were able to determine such things as countries from which attacks originated. China, the US, Russia, Germany, and Vietnam made up the top 5. Passwords attempted on these devices. Admin was number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wasn't too far behind. And the need to baseline security standards on IoT related devices to make them less vulnerable to attack. Thanks for watching. And as always, please like, subscribe, and provide comments and turn on notifications by clicking the bell in order to check out future videos published twice a week.
All right, so that's a video gives us a really quick overview of what is a honeypot. So let me go to this other link. This is a article from Computer World. And hopefully you can all see this. I'll make this a little bit bigger, get rid of this video. So the role of honeypots is sometimes you'll see them as a decoy-based intrusion detection technology. You'll see that term as well. Now, they used to be primarily used for research as a way to attract hackers in order to study their movements, but are now beginning to play an important part in enterprise security. So the security firms, like they said, Symantec was one of them. They used honeypots to gather information, but now regular users are building honeypots as a way of security. So, that'd be like if you had your front door on Main Street, right on a main street, and you built 100 other doors, but only one of them was the real front door. Well, if there was 100 doors in a line down the street, and a bad guy came by trying to opening the door, well, they have a 1% chance of finding the right door, right? So that other 99 attempts is going to, one, alert you that someone's outside, not, jiggling the door handle, because you'll hear it, 99 times before they get to the right one. And 2, it's going to, what are most criminal activity is based on opportunity. So if it's not easy, if it's not low hanging fruit, if it's not quick, it may not be worth the risk, right? So that's what we can use honeypots for as well. So a honeypot is a system that that's put on a network so it can be probed and attacked. Because the honeypot has no production value, there is no legitimate use for it. So that's very important. A user will not go to a honeypot because there's a file on there. They won't go to it because there's a website on there. They won't go to it because they know that's where they log in. The only activity for a honeypot is malicious, right? Someone's going there either out of curiosity or with bad intentions. So there is no legitimate reason a regular user would hit a honeypot unless they're either curious or badly intended, okay? Now there's two types of honeypots here. The research honeypot, which most attention today has focused on them, which are used to gather information about the actions of intruders. For example, the HoneyNet project. And a HoneyNet is a network full of honeypots. So if you have a bunch of honeypots on your network, then it becomes a HoneyNet. And that's a volunteer nonprofit security research organization that uses honeypots to collect information on cyber threats. And then there are production honeypots where less attention has been paid to those, but which are actually used to protect organizations. And increasingly, however, production honeypots are being recognized for the detection capabilities they can provide and for the ways they can supplement both network and host-based intrusion protection. All right. So I want to stop right here and take our first break, and then we'll come back and continue looking at that article, and then we'll get into a little bit more about honeypots. All right. So let's come back in like 10 minutes. So say 8:50, 10 minutes till 9, and then we'll keep going. All right. Let me stop the share. Pause. All right. So I'm back. I'm going to jump back into that article real quick. So how they work, you can read that section, but let's look at the advantages here, because this is really kind of important for us. Is security experts say that honeypots can succeed in a number of areas where traditional IDS intrusion detection systems have been found wanting. In particular, and these are some of the problems with intrusion detection, is one, there's just too much data, right? If they log everything, it becomes the needle in the haystack problem for the security expert. You're wading through hundreds of thousands of lines of log files, maybe even millions of log files, lines of data in the log file every single day, which means that just the sheer volume of this noise makes it time consuming, resource intensive, and costly to review the data. Because that could be good stuff, it could be legitimate traffic, it could be malicious traffic, because it's on our production network, right? We expect users to access our network, therefore they're going to be logged. Whereas a honeypot only has data that we can almost automatically assume any traffic on our honeypot is malicious. So we don't have to say, well, is Bob in accounting trying to do something good or bad? We don't have to worry about that. If we see Bob access our honeypot, we automatically assume there's only one reason, two reasons, either they're curious or they're up to no good. Okay. The other problem with IDS is the false positives. Perhaps the biggest drawback is that so many of the alerts are false. So a false positive is an alert that actually is legitimate activity. So you get, the notice that something bad is happening, but it's actually not. So false positives are a big problem, even for organizations that spend a lot of time tuning their IDSs. So you can go through and fine tune your intrusion detection systems so that they will only reveal, what you consider legitimate alerts, but there's still so many of them. And then of course we have false negatives. These are where something should be logged, but it's not, right? So the false negative will have that. So again, any activity with the honeypot is anomalous, making new or previously unknown attacks stand out. And then the other areas are resources. And IDS require resource-intensive hardware to keep up with the network traffic. And as the network increases, so does the amount of data it's going to generate. So the IDS has to get bigger and bigger along with that. According to Lance Spitzner, who's kind of considered the godfather of honeypots, the founder of the HoneyNet project, a single Pentium computer. Notice I didn't say Pentium 4 or Pentium 3, just say standard circa 1999 Pentium computer with 128 megs of RAM, megs, not gigs, right, of RAM can be used to monitor millions of IP addresses. So low value as far as, we're not probably going to redeploy Pentium computers on our system. I mean, if we said, hey, Jose, here's your new computer, it's a refurbished Pentium with 128 megs of RAM, good luck loading Windows on it. Our users wouldn't be real happy. And then the last part is the encryption. More organizations are moving to encrypt all their data, right? And encryption protects the confidentiality of our data, right? And remember, in security, we always talk about the CIA of kind of like the 3 pillars of network security: the confidentiality, the integrity, and then the accessibility. So the encryption does the confidentiality. So if it's encrypted, we know only the endpoints that have the ability to decrypt it can actually view it. Everybody else is just gibberish, right? That's non-usable. So like HIPAA, right now with the telemedicine and the remote consultation with our health professionals, you probably run into where you have to sign a release for HIPAA for the doctor to communicate with you over video, right? Because before they could do that in what they considered a secure environment in, say, the doctor's office or in the exam room. He or she could explain things to you that are very personal and very confidential, but now they're doing it over, Zoom or Skype or FaceTime or just over the phone. And not surprisingly, there's more attackers are also using encryption. Okay. Now, honeypots can augment IDSs and so forth. So there's a lot of information about what a honeypot is. Now, I asked you guys a question earlier, and I said, what was your first interaction with the honeypot? So let me tell you how I got exposed to this. I had a friend who got a job, and he was working at Azusa Pacific University in their business division. And one day he came up to me and said, hey, we have a guy working over here who I told him about you. He said, because he said he was looking for other IT professionals to kind of work with a little bit. And he said, I hope you don't mind, but I gave me your name. I said, no problem. So anyway, this guy, Bill McCartney, or McCarty, can't remember if it's Cartney or Carty, but it was Bill. Bill called me and said, hey, I'm Bill at APU. Jim gave me your name, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'd like to, if you don't mind, let's go have lunch. And I want to just talk to you about some of the stuff I'm working on. So we met and we had lunch and we talked. Then he took me back to his office and he said, I've been working on these honey pots. And he said, have you ever heard of them? And I said, no, I haven't. And this was probably in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002. And he proceeded to show me around his workroom. And on the workroom, imagine like you walk into room 401 or 405, a typical classroom, right? You have computers all along the wall, and billboards, or the bulletin boards all along the perimeter of the walls as well. And on there were printouts, and it looked like the FBI's most wanted, where he would have a picture of somebody, and then underneath it, it would say crimes committed, right? Illegal access to restricted copyright material, sale of, child pornography, whatever it was. And then across their face, it would have an embossed capture. So that caught my attention right away. I said, Bill, what are these? He said, these are all people that, because of my honeypots, I've been able to give the evidence that I capture to law enforcement, and then they're able to go, arrest and prosecute these bad guys. And there must have been 25 pictures on the wall. So then he asked me, would you like to get involved? And I said, yeah. And so for the next, I don't know, maybe a year, every Saturday I'd go over there and we just kind of look at their honeypots, how he had them set up. He had this server rack full of servers that he got donations for, that he was running his honeypots. But the problem is it really just was him doing all of it, then me one Saturday a month, or one Saturday a week, or every Saturday of the month. And eventually he got into some health problems, and he just kind of disappeared. He didn't die or anything. We just, had to move on. So I kind of lost touch with that. Well, fast forward a few years and I'm in my master's degree, and we have to come up with our master's dissertation, right? To come up with our final paper. And I wrote a paper on honeypots. And this was at Cal State Fullerton in their Master's of Science in Information Technology degree. And the 3 of the 5 reviewers, right, the faculty reviewers who read my paper and then commented back to me, 3 of the 5 said they never heard of a honeypot, and they were just enthralled with the information I gave them. They were just like, this is the most interesting thing I've ever heard. 2 of them had heard of them, and they were pretty impressed too. So that's kind of my background with honeypots. Is I've worked with them a little bit. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on them. And then I wrote my master's paper for my master's degree on honeypots as well. Okay, so these honeypots gather much more information than a network intrusion detection system. And we know, or you guys should know, for a network intrusion detection system versus a network intrusion prevention system, one is passive, right? The detection is passive, and the prevention is active. So these are passive systems, whereas a honeypot can log the keystrokes of an interactive session, even if the encryption is used to protect the traffic. So the intrusion detection system requires signatures of known attacks, right? You have to just like our antivirus is passive, in that we have to download the signature files from our antivirus company, right? And that normally happens several times a day or once a day. And then if it looks like something in there, we can detect it. If it doesn't, if it's a 0-day exploit or a brand new attack, there is no footprint. It doesn't look like something because it's brand new. And our systems won't detect it because of that. Whereas honeypots can detect vulnerabilities that are not yet understood. So even though, yeah, am I not streaming I'm not sharing my screen. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Thanks, Frankie, for reminding me. I was going forward here. So really I only did this, this slide and then this slide. So honeypots, on the other hand, they can detect even if it's 0-day. Because of why? Why is that? Why do we know that this is a legitimate evidence or legitimate traffic? Is because the only reason someone's on our honeypot is for bad reasons. So right away, we know if you're on there, no matter what it is, whether it's something we've seen before or something brand new, it's probably malicious, okay? Now, because a honeypot has no production value, any attempt to contact it is suspicious by very definition, okay? And this allows us that all data collected to be much less likely to lead to a false positive when compared to a network intrusion detection system, all right? So the value in the honeypot comes from the authenticity of the data collected. We know if someone got on there, either they're curious or they're up to no good. So we can and then if we had a curious user on our network that was logging into our honeypot, we would want to talk to them, right? We would go over and say, hey, John, why are you accessing this server? Can you explain? I saw your name in the log files, and there's no reason for you to access that. Why are you doing that? And kind of put them on the spot. Now, that might not be a fireable offense, but it may indicate that, John may have some character issues that we want to be aware of, right? So it can help us with both our internal and our external employee classification and kind of keeping an eye on things. Now, honeypots can run on any operating system and any number of services. So the video mentioned the low interaction honeypots and the high interaction honeypots. The low interaction ones require very little resources, right? Like a Pentium with 128 megs RAM. On the other hand, high interaction could be a whole rack full of servers that are being monitored, like Mr. McCartney did. So the amount of a low interaction, and we're going to use that KF sensor today on a Windows machine that's a virtual. So it's very low hardware requirements. That would be a low interaction. And but we could build a whole server room full of honeypots and then have someone monitoring or a team monitoring. That would be a high interaction. Now, the services that we allow will determine what kind of activity we get. If we put out a server with nothing on it, other than the operating system, we'll probably get very few attacks. Now, it might get probed. It might get, some of these scripts may go out and probe it and say, do you have port 22? Do you have port 21? Do you have port 23? Do you have port 80? Do you have port, 135? Do you have port, 3389? Do you have port, whatever the ports are that it's looking for? So it may probe it, but if it doesn't find any, it's not coming back. So that could be like a decoy system just to kind of tie them up so they take time, but it's not going to really have a lot of value. All right. So the configure services, if we have services, so if we have SSH that we want to not only have it probe, but potentially compromise, then we can gather more evidence, more information that can show us what is there. Okay, so here are the two broad categories, the high interaction, the low interaction. High interaction provides a real system that the attacker can interact with. The low interaction simulates some of the parts. So today we're going to use that KF sensor, which is a low interaction honeypot, and we're going to attack it from another machine using Kali Linux, and we'll see the alerts, and it will tell you in the last part of today's lab, it will show you, you should be able to look at the attack. You'll do the attack on your own honeypot, and then you're going to tell me, what did that attack do? So you're just going to run a command, and you may not know what the command's doing just from typing the command. I mean, you're just running it. But when you look at the evidence, you'll be able to tell me what it actually tried to attack. Okay. Whereas a high interaction honeypot can be completely compromised, allowing an adversary to gain full access to the entire system. So from this full access, other systems can be attacked. So if somebody uses our honeypot, they can, and they compromise it, they could attack somebody else from that. So that's where some of this legal interaction comes in. A low interaction honeypot simulates only services and cannot be exploited to get complete access to the honeypot. And the low interaction, to reset it, is as easy as just clicking a button that says restart service. And all of a sudden it goes back to the way it was, before it was attacked. Whereas a high interaction, normally you gather people are in it, and then you turn it off, and then you do the forensics on it, where you actually look at what files, what directories, what user accounts, what keystrokes, what IP addresses, and you always want to treat the hard drive as forensic evidence that could be used in a court of law. So what me and Bill would do, once a server was compromised or used, we would take that hard drive out and we would put it in another machine and clone it. We would clone the hard drive, and then we take the original that was never touched. There was a chain of custody where we would, Bill would sign this paper, said, I had this hard drive in my possession. I gave it to Ken Miller. I'd sign it. And then I say, I gave it back, and we sealed it. So it'd be in this sealed bag in case it needed to be turned over to law enforcement. There was a chain of custody, and then we would take the clone of the hard drive, and then we would use these Linux tools to look at what was done. And some of them were as easy as just looking at the log files and say, well, this came in from this IP address, and we'd write that down in our little logbook. This came in, this did this, they downloaded this software, they created this user account, they misspelled this command. I mean, you'd see everything. But we'd never do it on the original. So in like the Security Plus class, we talk a lot about chain of custody and forensic evidence. You want to make sure on a high interaction, you do that as well. Now, low interaction, there really isn't a lot of evidence other than this is what they tried to do. So the value in that would be if someone keeps trying to attack your SSH, and only a company on the other side of Texas is SSHing in for support, we could just call them and say, hey, or send them an email, say, hey, we're changing our port, here's the port, and then that fixes that problem. So, but it gives us kind of a heads up on that. Now, low interaction honeypots are more limited, but provide good information about worms and probes. So if your network is getting probed all the time, it'd be good to know that, right? We don't want to be the IT professional with our head in the sand and never know what's going on, right? We want to know what's out there, especially in today's environment, right? I posted this in the CNET50 class, which I don't think anybody in this course is in that class, but in 2017, which was the latest data I could find, there were somewhere around 700,000 IT security jobs that they wanted to hire. And they could only hire about 200,000 or 300,000 people. So they're still short almost 400,000 or 300,000 IT security professionals. So if you're looking for an area that to specialize in IT, security is it. I mean, that's one of the biggest growing ones. If you have a clean background check, like with the CIA and the FBI and the Homeland Security, the government is constantly, I mean, I'm like every day they're running new ads for security professionals, as well as, there's private companies that also are looking for that. So if this kind of strikes a little bit of interest in you, the first time hearing about this, first time kind of getting your hands on it in today's lab, there's a lot of opportunity out there right now, and they don't anticipate this area getting smaller. It's only going to increase over time. Okay, now a high interaction honeypot is a regular computer system, such as a server, a router, or any other device that's sole purpose is to be compromised. And only standard services or daemons should be running on the honeypot. So we're not going to do anything unusual. A lot of times, if we do an operating system, we'll just do a Windows install with no updates, and we'll put it out on the internet, and then we'll monitor that system to see what happens to it. And if you're really kind of brave, I mean, most of us have a home wireless router that does our firewall. Go into your firewall settings and turn off the firewall so that nothing's being blocked from the internet into your network. Just instead, most of them are probably on medium or high security. Turn it off, and then turn off your firewall on your Windows machine and disable Windows Defender on Windows 10, and just let your machine run for a couple hours, and then turn everything back on, and then download Malwarebytes and see what's on your computer. You will be surprised at how fast your system can get infected with all kinds of stuff without you doing anything other than just opening the door for it. So that's basically what a honeypot is. I wouldn't recommend that on your system unless you, one, have a good backup, or you like rebuilding your operating system. Okay, now recall that the honeypot should have no production value. So that means it should not generate any unusual traffic. This way, we can be assured that any interaction with the high interaction honeypot is in fact malicious. So it's not doing anything out of the ordinary. So we're not going to, pay for an ad on Google that says, check out our service, and make up a company name. And, so our machine's not going to be asking for people to come into it. It's just going to be sitting there. And if anyone comes into it, we know for sure that we can be assured that it's from, in fact, malicious activity. Okay. So I know I'm kind of harping on that, but it's very, very important that we understand that about a honeypot. Now, a collection of honeypots is known as a honey net. Usually, a honey net will have a variety of honey pots. So different platforms, different operating system, some may be routers, some may be, firewalls that are able to be compromised, Windows, Linux, Mac, whatever. And this allows us to simultaneously collect data about all kinds of different types of attacks. So the honey net is really like the honeypot in multiplicity, where we have multiple things. Now, obviously, I mean, this should go without saying, if you are working for a company and you start putting up honeypots, it's going to require a lot of time, because it's not, it's kind of like a mousetrap, right? If you have a mousetrap, even if it's a live trap, if let's say you put a live trap in your garage for a mouse, say you have a mouse in your garage, and a mouse goes in there, and your intention is to release it. If you never check the mousetrap, if you never walk by and say, oh, hey, there's little Mickey Mouses in my mousetrap, let me go release them out in the park. If you ignore that, or don't, so if you set these up and don't do anything with them, what are you going to end up with? You're going to end up with a stinky dead mouse in your garage that's going to, cause all kinds of problems. So if you do a high interaction and you do a honey net where you have a bunch of them, it is going to be time consuming. It is going to take physical and personnel resources to maintain it. And some companies may not, they may look at the budget and say, we don't have the resources to, fund your little pet project of honeypots and a honey net. Even though it may be very, very valuable, a lot of companies look at the bottom line. And if you say, well, this will prevent future attacks, and if these attacks occur, it may cost us, millions of dollars in ransomware, they may say, well, we're just gonna have to take our chances, right? We're not gonna spend, $200,000 or $300,000 a year on additional resources for something that may or may not ever happen, right? A lot of companies, they think of it that way, and they'll take out insurance and say, well, I'll pay $500,000, the insurance company can pay the rest. It's just kind of the cost of doing business. So if we do a honey net, there's a lot to it. Okay. Now, a honey net creates a fishbowl environment that allows attackers to interact with the system while giving the operator the ability to capture all of their activity. So most of the time, these honey nets are created where they are observable, right? So we can see, either through software most of the time, what is happening on another machine. So we have like a terminal that, or a connection to the honeypot. We don't actually do anything on the honeypot, but all the traffic is viewable on another machine. So, we can log in. It's like when I share my screen, you can see what I'm doing. And, if you wanted to, you could capture screenshots, you could get evidence of a remote connection. And that's exactly what we do with our honeypots. So we set them up and then we observe them. So the fishbowl also controls the attacker's actions, mitigating the risk of them damaging any non-honeypot system. So again, it's like the mousetrap. If we don't observe it and make sure, we're going to end up with some stink. Same thing with our honeypots. If we just leave them and don't do anything, they could be used to do some damage somewhere else. And then now we have to, get in with our lawyers. Okay. Now, one of the drawbacks of the high interaction is the high maintenance. They have to be carefully monitored and closely observed. And a compromised honeypot can take a lot of time to analyze it. Now, if you're just doing it for the fun of it, you're probably not going to take the time to forensically seal the hard drive and have a solid chain of custody, right? Maybe you're not ever intending on turning over the evidence to any law enforcement or any, buddy that would pursue that. So if you're not, then, there's not. But if you're going to do it by the letter of the law and make sure it's admissible in court, you have to do it a certain way. And that can take a lot of time and resources. All right. Now, a low interaction honeypot emulates services, network stacks, or other aspects of a real machine. They allow an attacker a limited interaction with the target system and allow us to learn mainly quantitative information about attacks. So we just get to see how many attacks, how many probes, how many, brute force password cracks did they do. We can see that kind of information. We're not going to really see the qualitative information, the step by step. If we want that level, we need a high interaction. A low interaction will not give us that. Okay. Now, the level of interaction should be just enough to trick an attacker or an automated tool, such as a worm, looking for a specific file to compromise on the server. So the advantage is it's very simple to set up and very easy to maintain, right? We can just hit pause, go do our thing, come back, hit start again if we want to have it running on another window, and we'll just kind of keep it there. And then when we're done, we just turn it off and, away it goes. So you can normally just deploy the low interaction honeypot and let it collect data. There's little to no worries that the machine can be used to cause any damage to the rest of your network. So low interaction is very, very common, but you don't get the minute details of the attack sequence. Now, they're easily deployed, and it's not uncommon to see a large honey net consisting of a vast array of different types of services available through a large amount of low interaction honeypots. All right. And they can be deployed on both physical machines or on virtual environments. So physical often implies a high interaction honeypot, and they're more expensive to install and maintain. A virtual, normally, that's how you're going to do a low interaction. So as you've learned in this course up through, the first 11 weeks here, it doesn't take a lot of time or effort to spin up a new VM. So we could create a new virtual machine and, clone it 50 times and have 50 honey pots running in a matter of less than an hour, right? So it's pretty easy to set up. All right, so I'm going to pause the lecture right here because there's a couple things that we're going to need to do. So what I want you to do is log into your server. So go on to Apache Guacamole, connect to your server. And on our servers, I want you to go to our file share, which you hopefully have that address in your history. So go to / 10.28.72.50. And if you go to share and it prompts you for a password, it's CNET58, CNET58. Then go into the CNET58 folder, and there's a file over there called Kali Linux -- bunch of numbers. So go grab and copy that. I just put mine on my desktop. In the lab, I asked you to put it in the ISOs folder. So I'll be good and put it in my ISOs folder. So it should be in your ISOs folder. I don't need that anymore. All right. So now we should have 4 ISOs. The 3 we used so far, Windows 10, Server 2019, and CentOS. Now we're going to copy Kali Linux over. Okay, so again, this is on 10.28.72.50. Double click on share. If it asks you for a password, CNET58, CNET58. go into the CNET58 folder. If you sort by size, it's the fourth one. So since it's the fourth one we're building, it's the fourth one there. All right, and copy that to your CISOs folder. So just copy. And with everyone copying it, this file is pretty big. It's almost 3 gigabytes. So it's going to take, probably 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes with everybody copying at the same time. So that's why I want to do it now. So we have it available for later. All right. And then while that's cooking, if you will, let's open. So does everybody have a copy in? Okay, Louis has 60%. Frankie, okay. So make sure you get it copied to your ISOs folder. So while that's going in the background, go into Hyper-V Manager, and I want you to create a new virtual machine. So just go new virtual machine and call it Kali Linux. And let me pull up, I don't want to start mine, but make sure you give it, I gave mine 4 gigs of RAM, and I gave it a 25 gigabyte hard drive. And then for the network, make sure you put it on not LAN A or LAN B, but the Intel network, because it's going to need some internet access. All right. You can do just the standard memory. It doesn't have to be dynamic. I don't think mine was dynamic. Yeah, no, I don't enable dynamic, just 4 gigs of RAM, because really we're only going to run this and our Windows 10 machine today. Windows 10-1. Okay, so get that started, but don't install an operating system yet. So where it says install an OS, so let me do this. So I'll just do, I already have Kali, so I'll do Kali 2, Gen 1, 4 gigs. Connected to Intel, 25 gigs of RAM or of hard drive space, and then install an operating system later. Okay, and then go ahead and finish that. All right, so that's going to get us a little bit of a head start on what we're going to do in today's lab. All right, so does everybody have that set up? You have the file copying? All right, good. So let me go back to the lecture. And if you have not gotten the, let me share this screen with you. I just got an email. If you haven't been vaccinated yet, 10. It's // and that's the one above the enter key. 10.28.72.50. Hit enter. It should prompt you for a username and password. CNET58, CNET58, and then away you go. If you haven't been vaccinated, there's clinics that are available that are MONSAC employees and students are welcome. So if you're above the age of 16 now, you can get vaccinated. If you haven't done this already, and this is on campus, so it's on building 67A and 67B, which is is up by the health clinic, right? If you've like our buildings here, 28B, then the pool, then you keep going up and to the right, and you'll run into the health buildings up there, and you can do that. So the first dose is on Thursday of this week, second dose on Thursday, June 10th, and then you can also schedule it on the other days. Okay, and then you can, even if you don't live in Walnut, you can put in the zip code and then the mount sac by EVCHC to get your shot. Okay, and there's some information there. Okay, you want to copy the Kali Linux via thing. So let me go back here. So Jordan, if you can see my screen, 10.28.72.50, share, CNET58. If you sort by size, it's the fourth one down. And it's the Kali Linux 1-1.0a, blah, blah, blah. All right, you got it? All right, you're welcome. All right, so let me get back to the PowerPoint. So while that's running, or while that's copying, let me talk a little bit more about some of the legal. Oh, the hard disk size should be 25 gigs. All right, so 4 gigs of RAM, 25 gigs of hard drive, attached to Intel, not LAN A, not LAN B, but the Intel connection for the network, and then install an operating system later. And then just create the VM. The VM creation takes like a minute. Okay. Now, what about the legal? Right? I know, you know, in today's society where everybody's suing everybody else for any ridiculous reason you can probably think of, you want to be careful, right? You don't want to be the vigilante IT worker that's just out there, you know, I want to capture and prosecute and lead to the arrest of every single hacker in the world. I mean, that may be a noble cause. In fact, there probably is a comic book somewhere with the main character, that's his function. But we don't want to be that guy, right? We want to be careful. So what are the legal aspects? Now, they have risks, right? Anytime you start dealing with these kind of situations, you're putting your neck out there a little bit. Yeah, unless you're Mr. Robot. That's a pretty good series there, Ian. But anyway, if an attacker manages to compromise one of your honeypots, he could try to attack other systems that are not under your control, right? They gain access to our honeypot, and then from that, they attack somebody else. There's some risk there. Now, your compromised honeypot could be used as a stepping stone to attack sensitive systems. This implies some legal problems when running a honeypot. But different laws in different countries make it hard to nail down what is and what is not legal, right? Now, here in the United States, we have a very limited, by number, federal laws. The majority of our legal system, our penal code, is state laws. And even within our states, right? We're the United States of America, and we have 50 states. One state may have different laws than another state, right? And we read about this all the time, right? The big thing in the news right now are you know, the voting laws that are different between states. So you're probably aware of that. Well, the same thing is true with some of these cyber security laws. Different states have different laws. So even interstate, the prosecution of that may be different. So if you're from Arizona, or you VPN into a machine in Arizona that attacks a machine in California, you may be looking at two different sets of laws. It gets even more complicated if we're talking about California and France, or California and North Korea, or California and Belgium, or any other country. The laws are not standardized, right? Because our systems, our governments, our way of life are not the same, right? Hopefully you're well aware of that, right? Not every country has the same rule of law or understanding as everybody else. So when we look at the legal, we have to keep that in mind. And as far as statutes, honeypots are relatively new in the security field, and certainly also in the legal departments. So if you talk to a lawyer and you start mentioning honeypots, the first thing they're going to do, I mean, lawyers are all about research, right? They are going to go look up precedent, what happened in these previous cases, because normally when there's a law, the law is interpreted by the legal system, and then they make rulings on it, and those set precedents. So if there's not a lot of cases, there's not a lot of precedents, there's not a lot of certainty as to how a certain thing may go, right? So the three main issues that are commonly concerns for a honeypot are entrapment, privacy, and then liability. So the ability to understand those areas is important for us. Okay, so let's first look at entrapment. And right off the bat, now let me tell you, I am not a lawyer. Okay, what I'm explaining, what I'm going to tell you is not legal advice. So if you do something and you end up in jail and your defense is, well, my professor said this is not illegal, that's not going to amount to a whole lot in a court of law. Okay, so it's like the when I was in the Army, you'd hear of these barracks lawyers, right? These guys that thought they knew about everything in the military and they could get you out of any problem. Well, here's what you got to do. You just got to, the barracks lawyers, and they had zero credibility, and you should not, take any legal advice from them or from me. Okay. So first off, though, I can say pretty assuredly, honeypots are not a form of entrapment. Many people feel that if they deploy honeypots, they can be prosecuted for entrapping the bad guys. So if you deploy a honeypot that lures somebody in, is the lure of the compromised system entrapment? Well, let me assure you, the legal definition of entrapment is, quote, a law enforcement officer or government agent's inducement of a person to commit a crime by means of fraud or undue persuasion. So unless you're law enforcement or a government agent, which as far as I know, that's none of us, if we create a honeypot and someone gets in there, we are not bound by the rules of entrapment. Okay, it has to be done by a law enforcement agency. Now, attackers find and break into honeypots on their own initiative. All we do is put them there. So the only crime our little honeypot has done is available. It's accessible. Even if you were to advertise, right? Go on to pay for some ads on Facebook, and for your fake e-commerce site, the honeypot is still not entrapment when someone tries to attack it. So entrapment is not an issue with honeypots. Okay, so we'll cross off entrapment. We're not going to worry about that one. So we can put them up. We're not luring them in. That's not our fault that they attack it. It's their fault for attacking it. Okay. The second one is privacy. And the challenge with privacy is that there is not a single statute that covers privacy. So instead, there are many different statutes, and this is constantly evolving, right? As more and more cybersecurity stuff becomes relevant, and there's more and more cases, there's more and more, legislation towards entrapment or towards privacy. So there are several, with the main ones, the main two being the Federal Wiretap Act. So these are federal statutes, not state. The states will have their own. There's the Federal Wiretap Act and then the Electronic Communication Privacy Act. All right. And you may have heard of some of these, right? Some of these cases, sometimes you will reference these statutes. All right. Now, as is common with the legal system in the United States, state laws can sometimes supplement federal law. So if your honeypot's in Arizona and an attack comes from California, what state's laws are enforced? What if the attacker is from outside of the United States? I mean, you may press charges against somebody in the Czech Republic, but good luck on getting them to fly over here and stand trial and then, willingly go to pay the fine or do the time for the crime they committed, right? The only way that works is if they get extradited from the Czech Republic, where their government would arrest them and then send them here. And that does not happen often, right? I mean, look at Edward Snowden. He's sitting in Russia and has been for the last, 10 years, because Russia won't extradite him to the United States for prosecution. So, you got to have cooperation. And if it's outside of the United States, a lot of times there is not that cooperation. Now, some countries are very helpful and some are not. All right. So of all the privacy statutes, the one that most likely applies to honeypots, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm saying most likely, this is my opinion, is the Federal Wiretap Act, which states that it is illegal to capture the communications of an individual in real time without their knowledge or permission, as this violates their privacy, right? So if you record a conversation on your cell phone and you do not tell the other party that you're recording it, it depends on what the admission is. It may not be admissible in a court of law, right? So a lot of times, they will announce, just like Zoom. When I pause the recording, it says recording paused. When I start it, it advertises, it announces recording beginning. So if I did not want to be recorded, or if any of you were actually presenting in this course and you said, I don't really want to be recorded, we would not record that part, right? So the Wiretap Act is most commonly, or is probably the statute that is one we should look at. Now, there is an exemption. There's always exemptions, right? Well, it's illegal unless you're a service provider. There's a service provider protection, which means that security technologies can collect information on people, which includes the good guys and the bad guys, right? The attackers, as long as that technology is being used to protect or secure your environment. So as long as your honeypot is deployed as part of your overall security measures, it is okay. So if you say, I'm going to create a honeypot because it will help our security team strengthen our security measures, that is 100% covered by the Service Provider Protection Clause in the Wiretap Act. Okay. So as long as that's what's happening, that's true. Now, if, on the other hand, you deploy a honeypot strictly to catch hackers because you are some sort of vigilante, you may be violating the Federal Wiretap Act. Okay. So you have to be careful with what you do and how you do it. So yeah, there's that. All right. Now, the type of data that you collect also plays a part in the privacy matter. So there are two general categories: transactional and content. I don't know why, but my phone is listening to everything I'm saying today, and it's opening up. It wants to copy everything I'm doing. So I need to put my phone in my drawer here. So Google's really interested in today's lecture for some reason. All right. So anyway, there's two categories of data: transactional and content. Transactional data is information about the data, such as the IP address, the header information, and the time and date of the communication. So you probably heard the term metadata, which is data about the data. That's what transactional data is. The content data, on the other hand, is the actual communication itself, such as the IRC chats, emails, keystrokes, download history, any of that, which would be considered content data. Information about the content data is the transactional data. Okay, low interaction honeypots limit the amount of content data that can be captured, and they mainly capture transactional data. So information about the content, not the actual content. High interaction honeypots are designed to capture extensive amount of information, both transactional and content. The more content information you capture, the potentially greater the privacy implications are. So be aware of that. Now, liability implies that you could be sued if your honeypot is used to harm other people. The argument can be made that if you had taken proper precautions to keep your system secure, the attacker would not have been able to harm another system. So just like we said earlier, if someone breaks into your car and uses it to run somebody off the road and they suffer damage to their car, they're going to have a hard time suing you for the damage on their car when your car was stolen, right? Now, if you left the keys in your car and the door's unlocked or the window's down, did you take precautions to prevent that? That would probably be debatable, right? It would still be hard to say, I left my car on purpose, vulnerable for someone else to steal it and run that person off the road. It'd be almost impossible to connect those dots. But, you would still end up in court, and we want to kind of try to avoid that. Now, to date, there have not been any cases where a compromised system, honeypot or regular, right? It doesn't have to be a honeypot. It could be a home computer that a user just doesn't have the technical background to know to do things. If they just turn it on and fire up their internet and not realize there's no updates, it's extremely vulnerable. If that system or a honeypot that we create on purpose has been used or compromised, that has been used to cause damage, has been found liable for the damages. So that doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means it hasn't happened yet. And it may never happen. Who knows? But the system so far has said that hasn't happened yet. Okay, so I'm gonna do something here. And for those of you that have not already done this, from your, let me see. So from your, most of you have done this, right? But those of you that just joined the lecture in the last half hour or so may not have. From your server, go to 10.28.72.50. If it prompts you for a username, it's just CNET58, CNET58. Copy this Kali Linux 1.1.0a, blah, 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 and copy that to your server's CISOs folder, because we're going to need that during the lab. And then once you have that copied, go into Hyper-V and create your Kali Linux virtual machine. And for those of you that have already copied it, we're going to come back to this in the lab and get it installed. The installation doesn't take that long. Okay, so I'm going to leave this screen up, and we're going to take another break here. It's been a little over an hour, but make sure between now and when we get into this last, 20 some slides on the lecture, that you have this copied over. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting there waiting during the lab. And my intent for today's lab is that we do a walkthrough together. So I'm going to record all the lab separate from the lecture and have that, because I had a couple students that said they can't make it to today's lecture. They're going to do the lab on their own. And some of you like to finish the lab after the fact. So the recording will be valuable for us to walk through it. So we're going to walk through it together and get this set up. So for those of you, I know a couple students jumped on just recently. Go to 10.28 from your server on Guacamole. So log into your server and copy this to your ISOs folder, this Kali Linux. Right? For everybody else, let's take a break. I'm going to stop this share. So make sure you remember where that is. And I'm going to pause the recording. All right, so let's get started up. I'm going to share my screen again so you can see what's going on here. And I wanted to show you another thing I found on online about security threats. Let me make this full screen. Full screen mode. All right. So can everybody see that? This from Trend Micro, caught in the act. Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm gonna post this online on Canvas as well. But I did a search last night looking for an updated case scenario, and this company goes through and they build a honeypot. And so it says here, full screen might not be the best. Make this a little better here. So they set up a fictitious company, and they said our factory honeypot took on the ruse of a small fictitious company that apparently handled clients from critical industries, yet possessed inadequate security defenses. Our ruse proved successful as our honeypot saw several attacks, which we had the freedom and resources to monitor. These attacks included a malicious cryptocurrency mining campaign, 2 ransomware attacks, another that posed as a ransomware attack, and several scanners. So in this paper, they detail how they created it and the conception behind it. So you can read this and see it. Here's their topology. This is how they set out the equipment and what would be there. So they had different Internet of Things out there, as well as some machines, some servers, and then some industrial equipment that could be compromised. So they built that. Here's the hardware they used, the interfaces that they had, the robotics workstations. So they made this whole thing look like it was a full-blown system. So let me get down here. They also did some branding of their system. And then they put their system online with social network blurbs and advertisements. So they got that. And then here's their company's homepage. We create your business. We handpicked royalty-free images, people in context. We wanted to look like, so they built this whole company with the sole intent of capturing the interactions, all the bad guys that tried to get on there. So they went through 2 phone numbers, then they built the honeypot, and they show where they have the taps here that go into to capture all the traffic at those locations. Here's the tap that they used. So these are standard network taps, which are common in security scenarios to get that. They use them to grab everything. And they use the Raspberry Pi 3 to handle all the traffic. So they use a little Pi to do that. They set up their firewall. They have access control list. So it looks like an actual network enterprise here. And here's their scripts. Here's the services and the ports. Here's some network analysis. They use VirtualBox screen recording because all these were in virtuals. And then they use VNC, the virtual network computing, and remote desktop to remote in and out of them. And here we go. So now one of the main goals of a honeypot is to be attacked. But how does one go about setting up a honeypot to be attacked? The approach we took was to stage leaking information to put us in such a position that attackers might find our honeypot interesting enough to play around in and eventually attack. To do this, we started by opening specific ports. So they did remote desktop, VNC, Ether, Net IP, a couple very Siemens, which is the industrial controllers. These were the ports that we started with in opening our honeypot through our AirLink wireless gateway. However, because of the increased amount of scanning, we saw huge performance issues. So they decided not to run RDPs, as at times made the internet unusable from our stance. Okay, so here's their firewall where they're allowing it. And later we acted like a victim infected by malware and uploaded several items to an online antivirus aggregation service. So a lot of these antiviruses will say, upload your your file that was infected so we can analyze it. Well, guess who else is watching those sites? The bad guys are looking. If you upload that you just got compromised and I'm infected with this, what do I do? That's like a, ringing the dinner bell in, a herd of wolves or a pack of wolves. They're going to come running. Shortly after, we posted some information about our honeypot on Pastebin as shown. This included our submission to the antivirus aggregation. We then wanted to see whether there would be an increase in attacks if we exposed the web human interface from the vendor of the HMI that we were using. We made a second post about this a few days later. Okay, so during the time, here's some of the lessons learned. You can read that. And incidents. Our honeypot went online on May 2019. For 7 months, we maintained the image of a real company and monitored the honeypot closely. The first attack we encountered came a month after the honeypot went live, with several others following in its wake. This showed that our ruse as a small business with critical clients and inadequate security was effective in luring threat actors. Some of the attacks we saw had been briefly mentioned in the previous section. Okay. One of the biggest risks we ran into, as with anyone else who has VNC or RDP open to the internet, was misuse of the system and resources by third party to engage. So here's where I thought it got really interesting. One of the first uses, so someone attacked their honeypot, got into it, and decided to turn it into a Bitcoin or a Monero miner. So Monero is one of the cryptocurrencies out there. And what's so interesting is their honeypot was so, normally for cryptocurrency mining, if you were to build a miner, the first thing you're probably going to look for is powerful GPUs, right? Graphics cards. This one, they didn't even care. That even though it seemed like it wouldn't do anything, right? The number of the hash rate would be so minute. That'd be like mining cryptocurrency with your iPad. It's just not worth the effort. You're going to run it and probably kill your iPad before you even get 10 cents worth of profit. So, but they found, imagine, that's like the guy sitting on the street corner and he only asked for a penny. Well, people are going to say, whoa, it's only a penny, and throw it in. But what if he collects, 10,000 pennies a day? And it looks like it's just one little jar of pennies, but every time it gets 5 or 6 pennies, he empties it so that it looks like there's only one in there again. And you'll be, oh man, I'll just give him another penny. It's the same concept here. If these attackers can compromise 1 million machines that only do 1/10 of a penny of cryptocurrency a day, take that times 1 million, that is now 100,000 pennies, right? That starts adding up over time. So they got attacked and they were used for cryptocurrency mining. So that's a common hack right now, is if someone can gain access to your system, they're going to turn it into a miner, because they're not the ones paying for the electricity. They're not the ones, doing any of that, but they'll get the coin sent to their wallet. The next one was a ransomware attack. So during the period we were running our honeypot, we came across 2 ransomware infections on our system. And as mentioned earlier, we purposely exposed VNC on our robotics workstation, recorded videos of the attackers carrying out their campaigns. So the first one was with the Crisis ransomware, which happened in September. We were able to document the entire duration of the attack. On September 22nd, a threat actor began looking around our system. Typical of threat actors, they first investigated the system, likely looking for important sensitive files. They looked at a few items such as a shared drive. The next actions were to close the robotics workstation application and go back to the shared drive to see how much information was on it. So they close it so it's not running, so they can go in and check it out. after these initial actions on our system, they then downloaded the remote desktop software TeamViewer, right? In fact, they opened Bing and searched for Time Viewer to do so. So they even misspelled it. Then they ran the TeamViewer installer. They chose to run TeamViewer only once and chose the option to use it for personal use, which is free, right? Once they started connecting to our system using TeamViewer, we lost the keystrokes because now it's through TeamViewer. That didn't stop us from monitoring the attack, however. And then they transferred 3 files from TeamViewer, the one btc.exe, which is the ransomware file, a variant of Crisis. And it's detected by Trend Micro. It's there with the hash rate here. Everything.exe, which is a normal application that lists all files on a file system. It allows an attacker to check whether a system is already infected by another piece of the ransomware. And then the ns.exe that used to scan mounted and unmounted physical and network drives. Its ability to scan unmounted drives make it very effective for ransomware attacks. Okay, so here's the user where they captured the screenshots of them downloading the files. After downloading the files, they connected to the system, used a computer name with a TeamViewer ID. Then they started transferring the files to the documents library. After this point, the threat actor began running each of the downloaded files, beginning with the ns.exe, they scan it. Next, they ran everything. As an administrator, while this was running, they opened a command prompt and typed in the command of VSS admin delete shadows all, which is commonly used in ransomware attacks. Finally, they ran the one btc.exe, and they were able to record all this. So the next thing, and they got a warning here, ran it as administrator. They checked the services to make sure everything was running. And when all that was done, they closed the last file they were in, and then the pop-up came on the machine with the ransomware warning. All your files have been encrypted. And so it came up, and then it has the note that says, this is how you can pay us. So an actual company, upon realizing that files have been encrypted and reading the ransom note, would have to go through several decision-making processes, right? And a lot of companies and law enforcement will just say, just pay the ransom, right? That it's not worth the effort to track these guys down because it takes too much manpower, too much resources. So a lot of companies, they'll just pay the ransom. So the ransom, I believe the first ransom was $10,000. So they on this small company. Now remember, they advertise, they set it up. It's relatively small. They said $10,000 worth of Bitcoin. So then they started having some fun where they emailed. So they emailed them back, and they basically said, how do we know that you can unencrypt our files? So the guy said, well, send me one of the files and I'll unencrypt it and send it back. So he basically said, oh, if you don't believe this is real, here's one of our files that's encrypted. We can't do anything with it. They sent it back. The guy unencrypted it, sent it to him, and they could actually view the contents of the file. And then they negotiated with them. They went from 10,000 down to 6,000. And then eventually they just turned off the system. So this was just a low interaction or a high interaction honeypot, but it was a virtual machine in VirtualBox. So they just turned it off and got the information. And then they went through another ransomware attack. So I don't know about you, but I find that very, very interesting information. And like I said, I'll put that on the web on Canvas for you to take a look at if you're interested and you want to read all of it. Super, super fascinating. All right. So all of us should have the Kali Linux ISO folder file in our ISOs folder. You should have created the Kali Linux. And so before we get that installing, which we'll do that in the beginning of the lab, let's talk about what is Kali Linux. Now, Kali Linux used to be called Backtrack. So if you search for Backtrack in Kali, you may get, information that is very similar. And it's free. It's an open source. It's based on the Debian Linux distribution, which is Ubuntu's based on. And it's aimed at digital forensics and penetration testing. Now, this is one of those really interesting concepts. If you go to Home Depot and you buy a lock picking kit, so if you go into their doors and locks and all that area, they'll have a section where it has how to some tools that will help you open a locked door, right? Same thing if you go to AutoZone and you look for a Slim Jim, they'll have stuff like that you can buy. Now, Kali Linux is the same way. A good guy would go to Home Depot to get the unlocking tools because they want to unlock doors for legitimate reasons. The bad guy would go to Home Depot and buy the kit because they want to, use it for illegal purposes or illegitimate activity. And Kali is the exact same way. IT professionals use Kali to learn about their systems, to test them so that we can strengthen our security posture. Bad guys download Kali Linux so they have the tools to attack our systems and exploit them. So it's there. Now we can run Kali either as a live CD or as an installed system. We're going to actually install it so we have a permanent VM of it. Now, Kali Linux is loaded with a wide assortment of tools. So I'm gonna start up my Kali Linux, which I have set up already. So mine's set up and installed. So you can see this here. It's just going to install or launch Kali Linux. And hopefully you can see the screen. You should be able to. Okay, then it comes up and it says log in. I'm going to click other. I'm going to log in as root with our password, CNET. CNET 2021, exclamation point. Log in. And this is what Kali Linux looks like. So it looks a lot like Ubuntu. And you'll notice that, at the top, they have a pinned version of the terminal because you're going to need the terminal a lot. Now, if we go applications, Kali Linux, it organizes a whole bunch of stuff. And it says, here's our top 10 security tools. Aircrack, Burp Suite, Hydra, John, Maltego, Metasploit Framework, Nmap, OWASP, SQL Map, and Wireshark. So some of these tools you've probably heard of before, like you probably heard of Nmap, you probably heard of Wireshark, but some of these other ones are a little more nefarious in their name. John is John the Ripper, and we're going to use John the Ripper to rip a username and password out of a hash dump. So that's not good. Metasploit is the one that we're going to use to exploit a Windows machine and get that hash dump. Nmap, we're going to use to scan our network to find the machine that we can use Metasploit on to get it, and then John the Ripper to steal it. So there's those, and then there's other information gathering, vulnerability analysis, web applications, password attacks, GPU tools. So you can go in and steal processes from someone's GPU and use it. Wireless attacks, exploitation tools, sniffing and spoofing tools, maintaining access, so backdoors. You want to set up some backdoors, we can do that. Reverse engineering, stress testing, hardware tracking with Android and Arduino, forensics, reporting tools, and then we have some system services. So there's a little bit of everything in our Kali Linux. So the tools that comprise Kali are all open source and free. So you could go get those, you could install this information on, we could use our CentOS machine and go download and install these tools. They're readily available, but Kali is already been compiled. It's set up to already have all this stuff on it. So they're all available separately if you want them, but we don't want to do that. We want them all in their nice little categories. So here are the categories. We just looked at all these: information, exploitation, forensics, stress testing, reverse engineering. There's all kinds of stuff here. Password, you name it. Now, the best known tools are Nmap and Wireshark. These are tools that a IT professional will use for good, right? Now, the bad guys may use these to find their targets, but we will use this, like Wireshark is commonly used to see what's going on your network, because you can't really look, no matter how long you stare at a Cat5 cable, you'll never see the ones and zeros in binary going by. But Wireshark can see that stuff, okay? So Nmap and Wireshark. So, and then Metasploit. So we're gonna use Nmap today. We're gonna use Metasploit. We're not gonna use Wireshark, but Metasploit is, it's a catalog of, or library of pre-developed exploits that allow you to attack other machines. So depending on what you're trying to do, there's probably a Metasploit attack for it. So, and it's command line. So it's a little cryptic to use, but there's there. The OPH crack is a powerful password cracking tool that can be used in conjunction with rainbow tables and password dictionaries to crack passwords. So you can, if you did a search on password dictionary files, you could download a dictionary file. So I have one that I downloaded. I think I have it under, let me find this file. I can't find the file right now. I thought I had it in. Hold on. Right. And I'm searching for that file, but you can download a dictionary file from the internet, which I've done before. And one of the things you can do, just really, really low level security, is you can download a dictionary file and then search for your own password. So if you're using a password of, Rumpelstiltskin or whatever it would be, and you search, you find it in a dictionary file that you can download from the internet, chances are someone will be able to crack your password, because they're just going to download these dictionary files and then run them with the OPH crack against your machine. And if it's in there, it's going to get it. Okay. So here's hold on. So here's a word list that I've downloaded, and it's just a text file, but it goes through all of the words that are common in the English dictionary. Okay. There's also a version of this for the Portuguese dictionary. There's also a version of this for the Japanese dictionary. So these files are very easy to get. So if you're using a password, first thing, if you think it's secure, download a couple of these dictionary files, see if it's in there, search for it. If it's in there, don't use it. Use something else, make up a better password. Okay. Because if your password's not in any dictionary anywhere, and a lot of people think, well, I'll just use a Chinese word. Well, there's Chinese dictionaries. There's Japanese, there's Portuguese, there's English, there's pick a language. There's a dictionary file out there for it. Okay. And I'm trying to scare you into having a good password. Okay. So those are some of the tools. Now, Nmap is used to discover hosts and services on a network, thus creating a map of the network. And Nmap was originally written by Gordon Lyon, who also goes by the pseudonym of Fyodor Vaskovich. And I think one of the requirements when the first day of hacking school is you have to come up with a cool nickname or a cool pseudonym. So Gordon came up with Fyodor Vaskovich. And Nmap should only be performed on a network that you have expressed written consent to do so. So today's lab is my written consent I give to you to scan our network in the stock room, because scanning someone else's network is considered a threat. So imagine if you were in the parking lot. Let's say you park your car at you run up to Chipotle for lunch, and when you come out of Chipotle, you get to your car, and on the other side of the car, someone's jiggling your door handles, and you watch them. You have a 4-door. They jiggle 1, jiggle 2, come around on your side, jiggle, jiggle. Right away, your first impression is probably, well, this is probably harmless. He's not doing anything wrong. Maybe he lost something inside my car. No. Our first thought is, what the heck are you doing trying to break into my car? There is no logical reason that someone would try to open your car doors unless they had bad intentions, right? Do you agree with me, or anybody out there disagree? I could imagine it'd be hard to disagree with that. So the same thing, if someone is scanning your network with Nmap, the only logical conclusion is they're trying to do something nefarious, right? Malicious. They have bad intent. Okay. So scanning someone else's network. So if somebody says, hey, can you take a look at my network from the outside in? and you start scanning their network, and then all of a sudden they accuse you of being, up to no good, please make sure you have written consent to do that. Today's lab is our written consent, because as the instructor, I ask you to run this scan on this IP range. Okay, that's your written consent. Don't do it on somebody else's. Don't do it across the internet, because you're asking for problems. All right. So Nmap can be run in a terminal as well as in a GUI using the Nmap program. There's also a version for Windows that you can use. So imagine a scenario where you need to determine what machines are on your network. This is a common network server administrator task. Who's out there? Who's using our network, right? Who's connected? That's a common thing. So how would you gather this information? Well, option one is to walk around to each station and take a physical inventory of the operating system and the network information. So we're going to send Duke and Luis to walk around the entire campus of Mount Sac and write all this down, assuming we're all back in the offices, right? And 2 months later, they come back with a list that's now probably out of date, right? Because there's so many workstations, there's so many buildings, they're so large, it would take a long time, assuming it took 5 or 10 minutes to get the information and another 20, 30 minutes to get to each building. We're talking, weeks and weeks of arduous inventory. Option two is we can fire up Nmap and let it do the work for you. Okay. So the basic syntax, and you're not going to have to learn Nmap today. I give you the scan, I tell you how to run it, but here is a basic scan of a single host scan. So from within Backtrack or Kali Linux, you would type Nmap and then the IP address of the machine you want to get information about. And this comes back with a little bit of information that may be useful. So first, I know right away, this machine has SSH, Telnet, HTTP, and HTTPS running. And it's got a MAC address that is registered with Cisco or Linksys. So that means I know what the network card is. And Nmap says it's done, and it's did one IP address scan in 21.66 seconds. So instead of 2 weeks to gather all this information, I can scan a single host in about 20 seconds. I can scan everything on my network in just a matter of seconds. And the nomenclature, now remember, this is Linux, so it is case sensitive. And in Windows, it's also case sensitive because there's a difference between a lowercase p and an uppercase p. But I'm saying Nmap with the switch -SP, the entire network, 192.168.1. everything, will scan that network using only the ping protocol. So I can tell Nmap use ping, I can tell it to use ARP, I can tell it to use other protocols to see what's on my network. And this is going to come up and it says, I scanned 256 IP addresses, 16 hosts are up, and it was scanned in 3.22 seconds. So away we go. Now I know what's up. Now I cut this off because it was longer. I mean, it showed all 256, but it tells me the summary at the end. I can also tell it to scan a range of hosts. So this one I'm saying use S-S. So instead of ping, use the TCP SYN scan. Now, remember from our networking discussions in other courses, TCP is connection oriented, guaranteed delivery. And how does it do that? With the three-way handshake, right? Where it starts with the TCP SYN, this TCP acknowledge, and then the TCP SYN and acknowledge. So it basically says, hey, let's synchronize. Okay, I acknowledge that. Now let's both synchronize and acknowledge each other. And then once that's done, transmission occurs. So what this does, yes, exactly. Frankie said, so Nmap gives you information on what ports to attack for an attacker, along with other information about the network. Exactly. This is giving us what's out there. Okay, so this Nmap-SS says use the sync TCP SYN attack scan, use a protocol scan, and then I want you to tell me the version of the OS and do a discovery on the operating system and only do the host from 0 to 50. So now it comes back and look what I found on my network. Well, it tells me 1.40 is from Nintendo. It's running Dell embedded, Nintendo embedded, Radware embedded. Could not find at least one open and closed port, so that's good. But it told me it's a switch or a game console. The next thing it found is a Sony computer entertainment. This is a router general purpose game console. So right away, you can see I have a Nintendo Wii on my network, and I have a Sony PlayStation 3 on my network. So if you just walked into my front door, you would never see those because they're in a cabinet. But if they're on and you can actually scan my network, you would be able to find those. Now, let's scan each machine with T5. So I want it to take the least amount of time possible. So now I'm going to do a basic scan, my entire network. And this tells me again, there it finds my Nintendo again. And it finds the server that I'm doing this from, which is the backtrack, the Kali on my home network. It found that too. So, and it does it very, very quickly. Here's another scan, and it says use the top 20 ports out of the 1,000 Nmap ports. So now it says, here's this machine has these ports open. The next machine has the following ports. So as you can see, we can get a lot of information. All right. Now, there's also a GUI version, and this is the one we're going to use in our lab today, is we're going to use ZenMap. So we can launch ZenMap by going into our virtual here. So I'm going to log back in. And if I go to a terminal, and all I have to do is type ZenMap, hit enter, and it opens the GUI. So then I can tell it. So here's if I want to scan my network, which the one I give you consent to do is 10.29.72.0. And if I say do an intent scan, notice these are all kind of canned. So if I say use TCP ports, it tells me use all the ports from 1 to 65.535. If I wanted to do a ping scan, that would be that dash SN. If I want to do a quick scan, it'll give me, so an intent scan is what we want to do. And then I just hit scan. Okay, so this is going to take a few minutes to do. So be careful, because I have you scan the network a couple times today, and you're just going to do the same scan in ZenMap. So I'm going to come back to this in just a second when it's done scanning you can see what that looks like. So that's ZenMap. And it gives you the exact same output as the GUI does. It's just easier to click on the scan type to do it. Now, remember Peter Parker from Spider-Man? And remember the mantra of Spider-Man? I'm going to adopt that as the mantra for CNET as well. And with great power comes great responsibility. So I'm not showing you all this stuff about, Kali Linux and, Nmap scanning and John the Ripper for password cracking or any of the other things, Metasploit. I'm not showing you that so you can go have a lucrative career as a cyber criminal. That's not my intent. My intent is that you would use these tools to help companies that you work for be more secure. And you would find vulnerabilities and fix them, right? Identify threats and then mitigate them so that when you're in those positions, you're able to do a great job and keep everything running the way it's supposed to go. Okay. Now in another class, in CNET58, we talk about ethics. And ethics is the really basic definition that I came up with for ethics is be good, do good. So if you do good things, you're probably going to be ethical, right? Now, I mentioned at the beginning of all this that these same tools can be used for both good and bad. That I'm not trying to hide the fact from that, but I do want to encourage you to don't download Kali Linux or don't grab that ISO that is on your machine and copy it to your home computer and then start cracking, air cracking your neighbor's wireless. That's not it's not there for that. Now, if their wireless is really unsecure, and you tell your neighbor, hey, your wireless is really unsecure, and they say, well, I don't think anybody can bother with it. You might say, well, let me show you what you can easily do from this software on the internet. Then you may be able to enter in a discussion and then encourage them. This is why you need to, not use WEP for security. You should be, WPS version 2, WP or WPA 2, not WEP, right? So those things are important. And then Frankie, right, the General Tao said, you have to know thy enemy, right? To beat them, to understand them, to defend yourself. It's important that we know how to do that. All right. So let me switch back over and see if my scan is done. So notice this is done now, and it gives me, here's the output from the scan. And I know it's done because at the bottom it says Nmap done. Okay. So if I wanted to look at the ports and hosts, I can click on here. And these are the ports and hosts on this particular machine. So it gives me an inventory over here of the machine. So we know our network, MONSAC networks, the first IP is always the router. So this is a router, 10.29.72.1. Now, if it says, if I look at the details, it's going to tell me that this is actually a layer 3 switch that's doing the routing. So this is a Hewlett-Packard 2530 or 2920 or 54. So it doesn't know the exact name of the switch, but it gives me 3 options. Okay. And it tells me on that switch, there's 2 ports that are running. 22 and 443. So if I wanted to, I could run a crack against SSH and try to log into that switch if I wanted, for whatever reason, to get into that switch. So see how powerful this is, where it tells us, it gives us a topology, but there's so many, you have to really make that large, but it will show you what's on your network. Here's the details. So it tells me the various details on this. Let's see if they put any comments. No, it did not. And then the scans that were used are there. Okay, so now if I go to my server is, you can see here, I'm server L1. So I'm going to look at what's on my server. So again, here's the output. And this is what the output would look like just if we use Nmap from the command line. It tells me that I have port 135 open, 2179 open, 3389 is open, which I need that to be open so I can remote into it with Guacamole, right? And then 5357. It tells me the MAC address, the operating system that it thinks it's using, which isn't exactly accurate. And then it gives me some more information. So if I come to ports and hosts, there are my ports. The topology is still pretty grainy, but here it tells me that the name of the operating system is AV Tech Room Alert 26 watt environmental monitor. So this got this wrong because this IP address, my server is actually Windows Server 2019. Now, if I do OS classes, it still thinks it's an AV Tech. So that's interesting that it found that. Okay, so if I come down my list here, you notice a couple of these machine names say hack me. They're asking for it, aren't they? And if I look at my ports, I can see that I have some ports open. The host details, oh, this is getting good. Hack me is running Windows XP with 100% confidence. Okay, so we can see that there. And I'm going to close that because you need that for today's lab. And I don't want to give you all of the today's lab. So you can save those outputs, right? Or you can close it anyway. And then I'm going to close that. All right, so back to the lecture. With great power comes great responsibility. So I want you to be very careful that, I mean, don't go hog wild and after today's lab, start, hacking everybody around you or log into your server and start hacking everything you can find on MonStack. That's not the intent. It's to do this for good. All right. So I'm going to stop this recording and